December 23, 1944, Camp Papago Park, Arizona. The Christmas holiday is just 2 days away. American guards are looking forward to turkey dinners and letters from home. The German prisoners are settling in for another night behind barbed wire, or so it seems. At 9 p.m., the lights-out call echoes across the compound. At 10 p.m., a routine bed check begins. Guard Sergeant Harold Williams walks through Compound 1A, shining his flashlight across the bunks. Everything appears normal, shapes under blankets, the sound of men breathing in the darkness. But something feels off. The air is different, too quiet, too still. Williams does a second count, then a third. His stomach drops. He calls for backup, and together they pull back blanket after blanket. Pillows, wadded clothes, carefully arranged decoys. 25 men are gone. Not just gone, vanished. No one heard anything. No alarms were triggered. The fences are intact. It's as if 25 human beings simply ceased to exist. But here's the twist that makes this story legendary. These men didn't just escape. They dug a tunnel 178 feet long through solid desert ground, crawled through it on their bellies in complete darkness, and had planned to float down a river all the way to Mexico. A river that, as they would soon discover in the most devastating way possible, didn't have a single drop of water in it. This is the story of the most audacious and ultimately absurd Nazi POW escape attempt on American soil. But it's not the only one. Between 1942 and 1945, thousands of German prisoners attempted to escape from camps across the United States and Canada. Some came terrifyingly close to succeeding. Others failed in ways so spectacular they sound like comedy sketches. What drove these men to risk everything for freedom they could never truly reach? Why did elite military officers, men who'd commanded submarines and fighter squadrons, spend months digging through dirt with homemade tools when they were already safe, well-fed, and far from the war that was destroying their homeland? The answers reveal something profound about duty, delusion, and the psychology of captivity. This is their story. The Papago Park Conspiracy, Part 1, The Planning, 1:30, 6th Ray. Let's rewind to March 1944, 9 months before the escape. Camp Papago Park isn't just any POW facility. It's where the United States sends its most valuable German prisoners, U-boat commanders who terrorized Atlantic convoys, Luftwaffe aces who shot down dozens of Allied planes, high-ranking officers who once commanded thousands of men in combat. These aren't conscripts or foot soldiers. They're the cream of the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe, men who've been decorated by Hitler himself, officers who genuinely believed they were fighting for a cause that would reshape human civilization. And they have absolutely no intention of sitting out the war in the Arizona desert. The camp itself is well designed by POW standards. It sits on what used to be a state park, surrounded by desert scrubland and mountains. The compound is divided into several sections, each surrounded by double barbed wire fences, guard towers, and regular patrols. The prisoners live in wooden barracks, eat 3 meals a day, and receive Red Cross packages. By the standards of 1944, when millions are dying in concentration camps and on battlefields across Europe, it's not a bad life. But for men like Captain Jürgen Wattenberg, it's psychological torture. Wattenberg is the key to understanding this entire story. Born in 1900, he joined the German Navy after World War I and became a career U-boat officer. By 1941, he was commanding U-162 in the Atlantic, sinking Allied merchant ships and evading destroyer escorts. He was good at his job, cold, calculating, effective. When his submarine was finally sunk off Trinidad in September 1942, he was captured and eventually transferred to Canada, then to the United States. But here's what makes Wattenberg different. He'd already escaped once before. In 1943, while being held at a Canadian POW camp, Wattenberg and several other officers overpowered a guard during a transfer, stole a truck, and made it nearly 50 miles before being recaptured. The escape attempt earned him a reputation among German prisoners as someone who wouldn't give up. It also earned him a one-way ticket to Camp Papago Park, where American authorities thought the remote Arizona location would make escape impossible. They were wrong. Wattenberg spent his first weeks at Papago Park studying everything: the guard rotation schedules, the layout of the fences, the terrain beyond the wire, and most importantly, the maps in the camp library, maps that showed the Gila River running right past the facility. In his mind, a plan began to form. If they could tunnel under the fence, they could reach the river. From there, they'd build rafts and float downstream all the way to Mexico, roughly 200 miles to the south. Once in Mexico, they'd make contact with German sympathizers. Wattenberg was convinced they existed, and eventually find passage back to Germany via South America. It was ambitious, audacious, and based on a fundamental misunderstanding of Arizona geography that would doom the entire enterprise. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In March 1944, Wattenberg began recruiting. He needed men with specific skills: engineers, diggers, lookouts, fabricators. He needed absolute loyalty and secrecy. And he needed time. The first recruit was U-boat commander Hans Werner Krauss, whose submarine had been sunk in 1943. Then came Kapitänleutnant Friedrich Guggenberger, another decorated U-boat ace. One by one, Wattenberg assembled a team of 25 men, all officers, all determined to return to the fight. They held their first planning meeting in April 1944. The decision was made. They would tunnel out. But where to start? The answer came from studying the camp layout. The shower building in Compound 1A sat closest to the perimeter fence. Better yet, it had concrete floors that would muffle sound and drain covers that could be removed. Most importantly, the guards rarely inspected it thoroughly. It was just a shower house after all. What threat could it pose? On May 1st, 1944, they began to dig. The Papago Park Conspiracy. Part 2. The Tunnel. Breaking through the concrete floor of the shower building was the first challenge. They couldn't use hammers or heavy tools. The noise would alert the guards immediately. Instead, they used water. Every night, a team of prisoners would pour water into the seams between concrete slabs, letting it seep down and gradually weaken the mortar. During the day, they'd scrape away the loosened material with sharpened spoons and bed slats. It took 3 weeks to break through the first section, revealing the packed desert sand beneath. Now the real work began. The tunnel needed to extend 178 feet to reach beyond the outer fence and emerge in a thicket of bushes that would provide cover. That meant moving approximately 2,800 cubic feet of sand, roughly 85 tons of material, without anyone noticing. They organized into shifts. The diggers worked at the tunnel face, clawing through sand and rock with their hands and improvised tools. The haulers filled metal cans with excavated material and passed them back down the tunnel chain. The spreaders took the sand and dispersed it around the compound, mixing it into the natural desert landscape where it would disappear. The engineers were constantly problem-solving. How do you prevent a tunnel from collapsing in loose sand? They salvaged bed slats and created wooden support frames every few feet. How do you breathe 100 feet underground? They built a ventilation system using hollow metal pipes that extended back to the surface, disguised as drainage features. How do you see in pitch darkness without electric lights that would show up on the camp's power meter? This problem stumped them until one of the prisoners, an electrician named Otto, figured out how to tap into the shower building's existing electrical system in a way that drew negligible extra power. Soon, the tunnel had working lights, dim, but enough to see by. The psychological strain was immense. Men were digging in spaces so tight they couldn't turn around, couldn't sit up, could barely breathe. The temperature underground often exceeded 100 degrees. Sand got in their eyes, their mouths, their lungs. Several men developed claustrophobia and had to be rotated out. And all of this had to happen in complete secrecy. During the day, the prisoners maintained elaborate performances of normalcy. They played volleyball, held German language classes, and put on theatrical productions. Wattenberg himself led a lecture series on naval history, complete with detailed diagrams and animated discussions. Guards watching the compound saw exactly what they expected: bored prisoners killing time. Meanwhile, beneath their feet, the tunnel grew longer. By July 1944, they'd made it halfway. By September, they were within 50 feet of the outer fence. By November, they could hear American guards talking on the other side of the wire as they dug. But as they neared completion, a new problem emerged. What came next? Wattenberg's original plan assumed they'd reach the Gila River in late spring or early summer, when snowmelt from distant mountains might provide some water flow. But now it was approaching winter. Several prisoners who'd studied local geography began voicing concerns. The Gila River, they'd learned from subtle conversations with guards and reading between the lines in library books, was not like European rivers. It was seasonal, intermittent, sometimes dry for months at a time. Wattenberg dismissed these concerns. The maps showed a river. Rivers had water. This was Arizona, not the Sahara. There would be water. This denial, this refusal to accept an inconvenient reality, was about to doom the entire escape. As the tunnel neared completion in late November 1944, the conspirators shifted to the next phase, preparation for life outside the wire. They needed civilian clothes. POW uniforms were distinctive, navy blue with large PW letters stenciled on the back. Walking around Arizona in those would get them recaptured in minutes. So they began secretly collecting and modifying anything they could. Prison blankets were unstitched and resewn into crude jackets. Work shirts were dyed using coffee grounds and crushed plants from the recreation area. Trousers were cobbled together from spare fabric traded or stolen from the camp workshop. The results weren't perfect. Some of the civilian outfits looked like they had been assembled by colorblind children, but from a distance, in darkness, they might pass. They also needed navigation tools. Real compasses were impossible to obtain, so they made their own. One prisoner, an engineer named Manfred, magnetized sewing needles by repeatedly rubbing them against metal bed frames, then suspended them in cork floaters inside water-filled tin cans. The improvised compasses actually worked, though they required constant recalibration. Maps were traced from library books by hand, committed to memory, and destroyed. Every man memorized the route: tunnel to river, river south to Mexican border, border to sympathetic contacts. It was a fantasy, but it was a detailed fantasy. The raft question remained contentious. How many rafts would they need? What should they be made of? Some prisoners argued for building large, sturdy rafts that could carry multiple men but would be harder to conceal. Others advocated for small, individual flotation devices that each man could carry. In the end, they compromised. They built several small rafts from scrap wood scavenged from work details, camouflaged with mud and hidden in the compound. Several men also fashioned life preservers from inflated condoms and rubber gloves stolen from the infirmary. Ingenious, if absurd. Meanwhile, they stockpiled food. Red Cross parcels provided chocolate bars, crackers, and tinned meat. These were carefully hoarded and distributed among the escapees. Each man would carry roughly 3 days of rations, enough, they calculated, to reach Mexico. But perhaps the most important preparation was psychological. Wattenberg held numerous meetings with the escape team throughout November and December. He drilled them on what to do if captured. Give only name, rank, and serial number. Reveal nothing about the tunnel or other conspirators. Maintain dignity as German officers. He also tried to prepare them for the reality of being hunted fugitives in a foreign country, where they didn't speak the language, didn't understand the culture, and stood out like sore thumbs. His advice? Avoid people. Travel at night. Trust no one. Several men began to have doubts. One prisoner, a Luftwaffe pilot named Heinrich, pulled out 2 weeks before the planned escape. He later testified that something about the plan felt wrong. Not the tunnel, not the logistics, but the fundamental premise. They were in the middle of a desert. They barely spoke English. Even if they reached Mexico, what then? How would they get back to Germany? And why bother, when the war was clearly lost? Wattenberg reportedly told Heinrich that a German officer's duty was to fight, not to think. Heinrich was reassigned to a different work detail and watched in silence as the final preparations unfolded. December 23rd, 1944. The night is cold and clear. Christmas is 2 days away, and the camp is in good spirits. Guards are distracted by holiday preparations. Prisoners are exchanging handmade gifts and singing carols. It's the perfect cover. At 6 p.m. after evening roll call, the escape team begins moving into position. They've decided to go after dark, but before the midnight bed check, giving them a 6-hour head start before anyone notices they're missing. By 8 p.m., they're ready. 25 men crowd into the shower building, hearts pounding. Wattenberg gives a short speech in German. We are officers of the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe. Tonight, we return to duty. For Germany. For honor. For our families who believe we are still fighting. Then they descend into the tunnel. One by one, they crawl forward through the narrow passage. The improvised lights barely illuminate the way. Sand crunches beneath their bodies. Support beams creak ominously overhead. Several men are breathing so hard they risk hyperventilating. The journey through 178 feet of tunnel takes each man approximately 20 minutes. It's cramped, dark, and terrifying. Men who'd faced depth charges in submarines and anti-aircraft fire over Europe find themselves gripped by primal fear in this confined space. One prisoner later described it as crawling through my own grave. But they make it. One by one, they emerge from the exit hole in the bushes beyond the fence. They're outside. They're free. The night air hits them like cold water. For a moment, they just stand there, hardly believing it worked. Then Wattenberg hisses orders, and they begin moving. They split into smaller groups as planned. 4 groups of 5, 1 group of 5 with Wattenberg leading a special team. The smaller groups head immediately toward the coordinates where they believe the Gila River should be. Wattenberg's group takes a moment to carefully camouflage the tunnel exit, buying time before discovery. Then they head for the river. It takes about 30 minutes of walking through scrub brush and desert terrain. The moon is bright enough to see by. Several men are carrying their improvised rafts. Others have inflatable flotation devices. They're expecting to hear the sound of running water any minute now. Instead, they find a dry ditch. The Gila River, their highway to freedom, the centerpiece of the entire escape plan, is bone dry. Not just low or slow moving, completely, utterly, devastatingly dry. Just a wide, sandy riverbed with a few puddles that might charitably be called mud. For a long moment, no one speaks. The reality is sinking in. They have no boats, no river, no plan B. They're standing in the Arizona desert in ill-fitting civilian clothes with 3 days of food and no transportation. One prisoner, a U-boat commander named Quiet Fazlum, later recalled this as the moment he knew they were doomed. "We stood there like fools with our little rafts," he said in a post-war interview. "And I remember thinking, we have accomplished the impossible by escaping, and yet we have accomplished nothing at all." Wattenberg makes a decision. They'll proceed on foot. Mexico is south. They'll walk south. It's about 200 miles. They can cover that in a week if they push hard. They have food. They have determination. They're German officers, and German officers don't quit. So they start walking into the desert night, carrying rafts they'll never use, following a compass toward a destination they'll never reach. Behind them, back at Camp Papago Park, Sergeant Harold Williams is about to make a discovery that will trigger the largest manhunt in Arizona history. When the escape is discovered at 10 p.m., the camp erupts into controlled chaos. Every available guard is mobilized. The camp commander, Colonel William Holden, is roused from his quarters. The FBI is notified. Local police departments across Arizona and New Mexico receive bulletins. 25 German POWs on the loose, potentially dangerous, likely armed. That last part isn't true, the prisoners have no weapons, but it adds urgency to the search. By midnight, roadblocks are established on every major highway heading south. By dawn, civilian volunteers have joined the search. Ranchers, local police, even Native American trackers from nearby reservations. The scale is unprecedented. This isn't just a prison break, it's an invasion of enemy soldiers on American soil. But where are the Germans? The answer is everywhere and nowhere. With no river to follow, the escape groups had scattered in different directions. Some headed south toward Mexico. Others headed east toward New Mexico. A few, already disoriented in the darkness, actually walked north, deeper into the United States. The first group is captured within 18 hours. 5 prisoners had stuck together, walking along railroad tracks they thought ran south. In reality, the tracks curved east. By dawn on December 24th, they're exhausted, sunburned, and completely lost. They attempt to hop a freight train at a switching yard near Coolidge, Arizona. A railroad worker spots them immediately. 5 men in obviously homemade clothes, speaking German, trying to sneak onto a train. The sheriff is called. The men surrender without resistance. 1 down, 20 more to go. The second group fares slightly better. 4 men, including the engineer Manfred, decide to hide during the day and travel only at night. They find an abandoned mining shack in the hills east of Phoenix and hole up. For 3 days, they survive on their meager rations and water from a nearby cattle trough. On December 27th, a local rancher checking his property spots smoke from their cooking fire. He returns with deputies. The Germans are asleep when the law enforcement arrives. They wake up to loaded rifles pointed at their heads. The third group attempts something genuinely bold. 3 prisoners, all former U-boat officers, decide to steal a car and drive to Mexico. On Christmas morning, they approach a farmhouse near Tempe, Arizona. A 1938 Ford pickup sits in the driveway, keys in the ignition. They creep forward, open the doors, and find themselves face to face with the farmer's 16-year-old son, who's come out to do morning chores. The kid takes one look at these three suspicious men sneaking around his truck and starts yelling. His father emerges with a shotgun. The Germans throw up their hands. Escape attempt failed. As December turns to January, the captured count rises. One prisoner is found unconscious from dehydration near Casa Grande. 2 more are caught trying to steal horses from a ranch. Another group simply walks up to a gas station and asks for directions, in German. The attendant nods, smiles, and calls the police while they're studying a map. The desert is unforgiving, and these men, despite their military training, are utterly unprepared for it. They don't understand the distances involved, the lack of water, the temperature extremes. Many are suffering from severe sunburn, dehydration, and exhaustion within days. But a few remain at large, and the prize catch, Captain Wattenberg, is still out there. Wattenberg proves why he was considered one of Germany's most dangerous U-boat commanders. While other escape groups made obvious mistakes, following roads, approaching towns, traveling during daylight, Wattenberg does everything right. He travels alone. This is crucial. A single man can hide more easily, needs less food and water, attracts less attention. After the first night, when it became clear the river plan was hopeless, Wattenberg had split from his group and struck out on his own. He moves only at night, using his improvised compass and the stars to navigate south. During the day, he finds caves, abandoned buildings, or thick brush and sleeps. He's patient, methodical. This is a man who once evaded Allied destroyers for days in a damaged submarine. Hiding from Arizona sheriffs is actually easier. His biggest challenge is food and water. The rations run out after 3 days. After that, he's stealing. A pie cooling on a windowsill near Maricopa. Eggs from a chicken coop outside Florence. Water from irrigation ditches and cattle tanks. He becomes a ghost. Locals report missing food and disturbed property, but no one actually sees him. Wattenberg makes it farther than any other escapee. By January 5, 1945, he's covered nearly 30 miles in a roughly southern direction. He's crossed into Pinal County, gotten past several small towns, and avoided countless patrols. But on January 9th, his luck turns. A rancher named Bob Hendricks is checking fence lines on his property near Eloy, Arizona, when he spots something odd. Fresh footprints leading to an old irrigation pump house. The building hasn't been used in years. There's no reason for anyone to be there. Hendricks rides back to his ranch and calls the sheriff. By noon, 6 deputies have surrounded the pump house. They announce themselves in English, then German, demanding surrender. Silence. Then, slowly, the door opens. Wattenberg emerges, hands raised. He's lost at least 20 pounds. His face is burned dark by the sun. His makeshift civilian clothes are in tatters. But he stands straight, shoulders back, every inch a German naval officer. In broken English, he identifies himself. Kapitän Jürgen Wattenberg, Kriegsmarine. I am prisoner of war. He's the last of the Papago Park escapees to be recaptured. The Great Escape is over. All 25 men are back in custody. Total distance made from camp to capture. Wattenberg's 30 miles. Average time at large, 8 days. None came even remotely close to reaching Mexico. The Papago Park escape triggered immediate changes in American POW camp security. The shower building was demolished. Tunnel detection became standard procedure. Guards would drive heavy trucks around camp perimeters, looking for ground depressions that indicated digging. Bed checks increased in frequency. Compounds housing German officers were retrofitted with additional fencing and lighting. The escapees themselves faced punishment, though by Geneva Convention standards, it was mild. Wattenberg and several ringleaders received 30 days solitary confinement. Others got reduced privileges and closer monitoring. But no one was beaten, tortured, or executed. A stark contrast to how Germany treated Allied prisoners who escaped. Yet the Papago Park escape, dramatic as it was, wasn't unique. Across North America, German POWs attempted hundreds of escapes between 1942 and 1945. At Camp Huntsville, Texas, naval officers built an elaborate tunnel network that actually succeeded in getting 6 men out. They were all recaptured within 72 hours, wandering Texas backroads in stolen overalls. At Camp Como, Mississippi, prisoners built a raft from scavenged lumber and actually made it onto the Mississippi River before the raft disintegrated. They washed up on a sandbar and were found by fishermen. At Camp Crossville, Tennessee, a prisoner named Wilhelm Gunther walked out disguised as an American civilian contractor. He spoke perfect English, having lived in the United States before the war. He made it to Chicago and lived freely for 3 weeks before being identified and arrested. But one German prisoner actually succeeded in escaping permanently from Allied custody and returning to Germany. Franz von Vera, whose story deserves its own telling. Von Vera was a Luftwaffe pilot captured in 1940. While being transferred between Canadian camps, he simply walked away. During a prisoner transfer, a car drove to the St. Lawrence River, crossed into the then neutral United States, and eventually made his way back to Germany via Mexico and South America. His escape was so audacious it barely seemed real. Ironically, von Wera's success sealed his doom. He returned to combat duty and was shot down over the North Sea just months later. His body was never recovered. So we return to the central question: why did they bother? By late 1944, when the Papago Park escape occurred, Germany's defeat was inevitable. The Allies had landed at Normandy. The Soviet Union was pushing from the east. German cities were being reduced to rubble by Allied bombing. These prisoners were safer in Arizona than anywhere in Europe. Yet they risked everything to return to a war they couldn't win, in defense of a regime that had brought catastrophe to their nation. The answer lies in the peculiar psychology of military honor and the power of propaganda. For German officers, especially elite submariners and pilots, the concept of duty was absolute. Surrender was considered dishonorable. Remaining in captivity without attempting escape was cowardice. The German High Command explicitly expected officers to try escaping. It was part of their oath. There was also profound denial. Many prisoners simply refused to believe Germany could lose. They'd been steeped in Nazi propaganda about Aryan superiority and miracle weapons. Cut off from accurate news inside POW camps, some clung to fantasies that Hitler was about to unveil secret technology that would turn the tide. And for men like Wattenberg, there was pride. These were individuals who'd commanded advanced military technology, who'd held the power of life and death over enemy sailors, who'd been decorated for valor. Sitting behind wire watching American guards eat ice cream and read Superman comics was psychologically unbearable. Today, the site of Camp Papago Park is a city park in Phoenix with hiking trails and picnic areas. A small plaque marks where the tunnel once emerged, a reminder of the strange moment when 25 German officers crawled through the Arizona desert, chasing freedom toward a river that existed only on maps. The tunnel itself, that engineering marvel built with bed slats and determination, was filled in after the war, but the story remains. A testament to human persistence in the face of impossible odds, and to the strange delusions that can drive intelligent people to pursue futile dreams. If you found this deep dive into history fascinating, hit that subscribe button for more untold stories from World War II. Drop a comment about what you think drove these men: duty, delusion, or something else entirely. And let me know what other daring escape attempts you'd like me to cover. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the bravest escapes are the ones that teach us the most about human nature, even when they end in failure.